Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Shuchi, and I lead our go-to-market efforts at Headspin. I am honored to be joined by four amazing panelists who are industry leaders in their respective domains. We have Stacy Schulman, Vice President and CIO at the IoT Group at Intel, where she focuses on retail, banking, hospitality, and education. Anthony Robbins, Vice President of North America Public Sector at NVIDIA. Josh Sullivan, leader at Modsy, an enterprise AI platform and model marketplace, and also the executive vice president at Booz Allen Hamilton and the author of the Mathematical Corporation. We have Nand Mulchandani, acting director, Joint Artificial Intelligence Center at the United States Department of Defense. Thank you all for joining us. On this panel, we're going to be talking about the big technology trends in IoT, AI at the edge, and computer vision, and what the convergence of the various technologies means in the business application. Stacy, I'm going to start with you. You talk about normalizing the emerging technologies into various industries. What is a day like in the life of a CIO with that as a goal in mind?
Yeah, it's varied. So we spend my team and I, we spend our time primarily looking at two things. One is, what are all the available technologies out there that are emerging? What are the trends of the emerging technologies? And then what are the obstacles that can get in the way of adoption? And what are the problems of the various industries that need to be solved? And then I would say we do a lot of matchmaking between those two things. Here's the problem that needs to be solved. Here's the emerging trend. And then we look at, all of the obstacles, and we put a plan together on how to tackle those obstacles so that we can better enable an ecosystem to adopt those emerging trends.
Thank you. Anthony, your current role is it interfaces with the government. What do you think, from the standpoint of a public-private partnership, is required for that to be successful?
Well, in the case of artificial intelligence and let's say the US federal government, I think this is a giant team sport. And I think this is one of the most important technology transformations that the US federal government has ever undertaken. And I do not believe that they can take it by themselves. And so we as industry and partners have got to figure out how to intimately understand the mission of government, whether that's to improve citizen services or whatever it might be, and come to the federal government with ideas on, and it could be training, it could be ideas for how they manage their data, it could be ideas on how to build infrastructure or partnerships and solutions and the like. But the net is, this is a team sport, one of the greatest technology transformations of our time, and we have to be really great partners to the US federal government in this journey.
Great, thank you. Josh, tell us about Modsy and perhaps some examples of how you're helping enterprises accelerate the capability to better handle how they're implementing, scaling, and securing governing AI.
Sure, thanks, Suchi. We know every organization is going to need an AI layer in their tech stack to be competitive and to prevent, shadow AI from popping up all over. And Modsy is the AI layer for the enterprise, a platform to secure and govern and deploy AI models, including your own models and those purchased in a marketplace, maybe from others. And the origin story of Modsy is pretty simple. At Booz Allen, we were seeing AI early adopters struggling with the same problem over and over. Doing machine learning in the lab is relatively easy. Getting those models into production and scaling them so you actually get value is incredibly hard. And all the complexities of deployment and model management and security and preventing adversarial probing and data poisoning and all the MLOps takes lots of different skills. And lots of different teams, candidly, and developers want to use their own preferred languages and their training frameworks. They don't often speak the same tech language as IT security teams and DevOps teams, and so it's really hard to move from the lab to the enterprise. So we founded Modsy, and we built Modsy in order to make it easier to take trained models into production with features that allow you to run and deploy, govern, and secure AI models at scale. And the real end game here is to actually get value from the deployed models. One of my favorite examples of what you can do by accelerating models into production is from a company in the Midwest. They used a model originally built primarily for a national security use case, one it's publicly available, but it identifies the details of buildings from overhead images. And instead, they used that to scan all all the rooftops in Austin, Texas, and they correlated that with other data to find all the available areas for new solar energy panels in the city. So they were able to use machine learning and modeling to identify the whole addressable market for solar in the city. So it's exciting to see that kind of impact about the possibilities, that we can do with trusted AI.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. Nand, you have an amazing background, having spent majority of your career in the private sector. You moved to the public sector. How do you think you're using AI in your current role to help accelerate and deliver the best outcomes for the DoD?
Well, as part of the Joint AI Center, I think it's baked right into our organization's name. So it's all AI all the time for us now. Obviously the topic that we're going to be discussing here is, IoT and edge compute and other things. And it's very interesting how, in the commercial world, we talk about edge computing and how it relates to sort of what we're doing with the cloud, which is centralizing compute in one end, but then pushing a lot of the compute out to the edge, and then 5G connecting all of this at sort of very high bandwidth. What's very interesting is we have a very, very similar challenge here at the DoD. First, to echo the fact that, this is a team sport. This is very, very tight integration with the private sector. So those relationships, understanding how obviously the private sector works and being able to bridge that from a relationship standpoint, from a work perspective, has been very useful. But also bringing those analogies over to the DoD. So for instance, the tactical edge work here at the DoD is so incredibly important. Even probably just more complex and important than we would see in the commercial world. I've just had a whole new appreciation for the complexity of operating, at scale at the DoD, where for us, the tactical edge is in working in an environment where it's potentially degraded, denied. A competition in commercial land doesn't get, isn't trying to take down our tactical edge. And so there's a whole other level of complexity. But we are really relying on the private industry and the breakthroughs and the technology platforms that the private industry will obviously enable, that we can consume, but also customize and deploy for our own use case. So it's been a fascinating, move. But both the analogies and the relationships, I think, have been incredibly important and really great.
Wonderful. I think that's a good segue to my next question, which is the panel, as you said, is at the convergence of IoT, edge computing, computer vision, and 5G. What are some of and that is sparking a whole new level of innovation. What is each of you excited about in this space? And what are some of the cool technologies that you've seen, that you're using, some of the use cases? Talk to us about that. And I'll let whoever wants to go first. Stacy, can we start with you? Or Nand?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in and sort of continue the thought there, maybe.
Sure.
So for us, one of the big challenges is right now when you take a look at different parts of AI, and I talked about this before, is AI as a technology space is not just a single monolithic thing. It's obviously composed of multiple lines, multiple algorithms, vertical technologies, et cetera. So we think of this as sort of on a case by case basis. But let's take the topics that we're trying to discuss here today, things like computer vision, when it comes to sort of the tactical edge and other pieces. Right now, when you actually take a big challenge like that, the amount of compute, memory, power, and other things to stuff very, very sophisticated algorithms with large databases onto a chipset or a board that will then fit on, say, a pre-existing commodity drone of some form, or an aircraft, or something, a video camera sitting at some outpost. That's a very, very big challenge, and it's going to take advances in, battery life, in chipsets, in algorithms, in all kinds of things. And again, like I talked about, in degraded and denied environments, how does the tactical edge, the IoT device, connect back in, potentially upload data, download data, new instructions, new updates. And then there's the entire back-end process of how do you qualify that? How do you test it? How do you iterate on those algorithms in the central location and then download them after being tested or updated? That entire end-to-end process is an incredibly complicated one. and is going to be, I think, if somebody's thinking about starting a company or our partners on this webcast, if they're investing, which they are, this is really, I think, where the game is going to get played out from an exciting standpoint. The next gen technology here.
Wonderful.
You know, my head went to almost the same place as Nand. I mean, for me, I think running and retraining models at the edge is going to rewrite the next decade ahead of us. Right now, most machine learning models are actually quite large in size. They could be hundreds of gigs in size. They're very fragile to retrain on new, similar data. I just saw a proof of concept recently for an encrypted AI model running on encrypted data on an edge device. And if that device were lost or captured, you cannot reverse engineer the model parameters or the details of the training data as easily. And so imagine a complex model running on board a low power GPU chip. I know some of the NVIDIA chips are as low as 7 watts of power inside of a drone with the ability to retrain on new data while deployed. The example I saw was a crop management drone trained to detect drought and weeds, and it saw a new type of weed, updated the model weights for that class of object only. And then how can it securely redistribute just the model differences to the other drones nearby with the 5G modem? Simple, practical example of what's being built in the lab right now. And of course, I think Nand hit it. Of course, the military applications of encrypted models deployed in potentially hostile areas that may be compromised if left behind. And if you can encrypt them so that they're not of as much value if they get left behind or taken or an asset gets lost, or even in commercial, a commercial asset on a pipeline gets lost. The huge advances coming, I think, in encrypted models and encrypted data.
Yeah, and then I think some of the
not just in encrypted models and encrypted data, but huge advances on lessening the amount of data that's needed, because that's the other big challenge that we all have to address is the amount of training data needed, the provenance of that data that goes into that trained model, the privacy requirements that we all should follow and need to follow to maintain the accuracy and the privacy of that data. And just the advances, again, in lessening that data. So I'm seeing some really great advances on reducing the amount of training data needed, in particular for temporal-based models that I'm seeing really good results with.
And then if you think about the workflows or use cases across the federal government, you'll find things like inside the Department of Defense, platform sustainment is a huge opportunity for our federal government. Cybersecurity. There's nobody that's in the field of cybersecurity that doesn't believe that AI is going to play a material role, as well as with healthcare. And for example, the work of radiologists, right? So if you say healthcare, platform sustainment, cybersecurity, just to name a few, and then throw in for good measure, autonomous systems and robotics. Some of the biggest use cases across the entire federal government where they spend enormous amounts of money and have critical mission challenges will be advantaged by the advancement of artificial intelligence, especially to the extent that we can help the Department of Defense and civilian agencies develop and then get into operations. So there's a great opportunity here for all.
Wonderful. And I think Stacy touched upon the challenges. That would have been my next question. With any new emerging technology, there comes new challenges with how do you scale it, and from a privacy security standpoint as well. What do you think are the challenges that you, in your particular use cases, maybe are faced with, or things that people should be aware of? So if we can talk about that.
Yeah, data acquisition.
Josh?
Amount of data needed for that. Securing those models. I think Josh talked about that earlier. Once you get that trained model out, once it gets out to the edge, you need to make sure that's secured. Federated learning out at the edges, and the full end-to-end solution for all of that, from all the way from down at the edge and the device at the edge up to the cloud. Tying all that together in the pipeline for all of that is the biggest challenge that we're seeing right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Suchi, I think I agree with a lot of what Stacey said. Gartner report just came out and said #1 barrier to AI implementation was security and privacy. I think rightly so, but maybe I'll take it in a different direction. I think about it a little bit differently than I think most people. for me, deploying an AI model in your IT environment is an entirely new attack vector. I've seen a model working correctly that can identify tanks and other military equipment be fooled into seeing a school bus because someone sent poison data into the model. I've seen a model that is designed to predict someone jumping over a fence be totally blinded and miss someone because of carefully crafted pixels that were in the video stream. And that's just for models that are already trained and running right at inference time. There's also security attacks that can slightly alter training data sets with a little bit of misinformation to cause specific predictions to go wrong. In our Modsy Labs team, we were working with a commercial data set that detects malware, and the team was able to launch a poison frog attack, which is basically where you implant a small change in training data in a very engineered way, so that after it's trained, this AI model would not detect a certain string in a file. It would think it was benign, but really it was a malware marker. And so I think there's a conversation we're having about ethics, like facial recognition and the role of technology and privacy and law enforcement. And those are crucial conversations and the right ones to have as a nation. But I also think I don't want us to ignore what I think is an equally profound conversation around adversarial defense and the ability to hack AI models with poison data and attempts to influence their predictions, because we're going to keep relying more and more on these machine predictions, and you're going to create an outsized impact that becomes possible by hijacking just a few bits of training data to change an entire outcome. So I don't want to bolt the front door and leave the entire back door propped open.
Yeah, let me jump in on that point, because so there's actually a couple of things in there. You talked about AI ethics. You talked about obviously making sure that there is transparency. Obviously, all of the AI ethics issues around training data. So the thing that's interesting to us is obviously we are worried about things like adversarial attacks against data, the models, et cetera. But even more important than that is the training and eval side of this, because when you think of sort of an oxymoron like mass customization, think of a single system that's deployed worldwide globally. Now think of a situation where you've got a training data set that has been built, obviously we've trained the model on a particular training data set, but that data set is not representative of, say, global terrain or global information, or even things like faces. So when you think of the diversity of, obviously humankind out there, if you're doing something like facial recognition or something, the training data set from a testing and representative perspective is so important. So there is the adversarial aspect to it, but there's also the test and eval side to make sure that we can guarantee that a single platform that we deploy globally, worldwide, across sort of a uniform set of, say, our services, can perform well across all of these. And what we're finding, and all of us would agree, is we're still in the early days of AI, where the ability for a single data set to perform in multiple different environments and applications is incredibly important. So there's still a lot of research work to be done here, including the fact that what Stacey talked about in terms of the security of it, both at the tactical edge, on the transport layer, and then on the back-end cloud side, in terms of securing the data, securing the model, securing the transport, securing the endpoint, so that if we were to fall into hands, reverse engineering it, and then actually not only attacking the data, but being able to change the situation or environment that a tactical edge system is actually sensing, and being able to fool that. These are all incredibly important things that are very, very hard to pull together. But again, that's, I guess, what we're getting paid to do here. So that's all the stuff that we have to integrate together to make happen.
Yeah, it sounds like a simple task, right? So, and then I would just add, right, so there's work going on relative to AI principles between nations. So that work is going on. There's AI standards work that's occurring at NIST, as a part of the executive order and going across the federal government. There's really interesting work that has occurred and continues to occur on AI ethics. It was originally launched by the Defense Innovation Board and has then been picked up by Nand and team at the JAIC on behalf of the Department of Defense. And then, of course, some of the panelists mentioned security. But something also that's really important to recognize, because we face this exact same thing when we are dealing with the cloud adoption in the federal government. And just the simple fact of change and transformation leadership, right? That's a big deal. So if we agree that this is one of the greatest technology transformations that any of us have ever, stared into, then what this is about a lot is change and transformation. The Department of Defense has been working on artificial intelligence since 1957, we had major breakthroughs in artificial intelligence going back to kind of 2012, if you will. And the progress, the positive progress that's been made with respect to deploying artificial intelligence has been nothing short of stunning, right? And so as we at NVIDIA engage with customers in the federal government, they understand, they're the largest producers and consumers of data in the world. They've got to pay careful attention to standards and ethics, and they got to figure out how to get it into operations, and they got to rationalize this data and this infrastructure. But they often say, how do they get started? And sometimes that how do they get started, is fraught with change and transformation leadership. It's a very important skill, and sometimes it doesn't have a lot to do with technology, but it has a lot to getting the government to intersect with large transformations, the likes of which artificial intelligence is inspiring.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, no, thanks for sharing that. And my next question, I guess some of you touched upon startups, innovation. What do you think, what role does an open ecosystem strategy plays in the digital transformation, whether it's the government or large enterprises? It's like build versus partner. And how are each of you partnering with the startup ecosystem? I'm sure there's a ton of entrepreneurs in the audience that can surely leverage. That can benefit from. Yeah.
Well, I'll take a shot at it. I've seen kind of both sides of it. I've helped build and sell 4 companies in the enterprise infrastructure and cybersecurity space, so I've seen the startup side of it. And then I've seen exactly, obviously, the one of the world's largest customers now being part of, Team DoD. The great news is, from the outside, there seems to be this idea that the DoD, the Pentagon, has a very hard time liaising and working with tech startups, and even large tech companies. That very well may be true sort of, in the past or others, but there is a huge amount of change going on in the DoD in terms of partnering and working directly with tech companies, small and big. I mean, we've got projects going on, the Jake has projects going on with 7-person startups out in the Bay Area, to obviously direct work with actually every vendor on this call. I mean, Booz Allen Hamilton with, our joint warfighting operations, obviously NVIDIA, an incredibly key partner, and Intel on the hardware side, and even on the AI side. So, the ability for us to have those direct conversations, direct work with them, the environment has never been better. And there's huge changes going on in terms of how acquisition gets done, how we actually acquire, procure, and deliver software inside the DoD, from a DevOps, from a cloud perspective, and other things. So, I don't want to put too much of a, entrepreneur's sunny, optimistic startup spin on it, but it is actually, it is nowhere near what people think it is. It's a matter of, I think the piece that to me has actually been the biggest sort of thing over the past year I've been here is, the DoD is coming to grips with the fact that, and it's a sort of obviously a phrase in the industry that we use a lot, is, software and hardware is eating the world. The stuff that we do in the tech industry is transforming every single business in every area in the world, in the economy. And the Defense Department is not immune to those secular forces. It's one of the biggest, transformations that has to happen, because we are one of the biggest organizations. But it is absolutely happening. This realization that I call the sort of hardware-centric design point, to moving to a software-defined design point, is a realization that's happening all the way from, Secretary of Defense all the way down to, our service members, who the next generation of our digital natives. They come in, they understand how the world works. They're not insular and immune from that. And AI and consuming software the way they do and how we build it is just a natural part of how they're operating. So I'm very, very positive and excited about, the opportunity for us to do this. But we're not going to build software here. Our charter is to work with our commercial partners and bring that software in and enable it. And that's really the challenge that we're facing. But I think we'll get through it.
Yeah, and on that point, I think part of the, to deal with the open solution, open ecosystem point, I feel strongly that the pace of innovation in AI and the software is so fast that a single company just simply can't do it all. So the days of monolithic proprietary systems, I think, are over when it comes to this stuff. And we really do have to figure out how to build best-in-class ecosystems around this, and open solutions with open ecosystems, I think, are the only things that are going to actually keep pace with innovation today.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of areas where the federal government is doing great work, right? I mean, I think what we've seen in the JAIC by themselves, I think there's some fantastic work that's going on there. The Defense Innovation Unit, in addition to the work of the Defense Innovation Board, I think they've added some really great innovation perspective. I think the work the way that the government's trying to connect to Silicon Valley, Austin and Boston, for example. We at NVIDIA have this large inception program where we work with thousands of companies that are trying to figure out how to get into commercial and government markets. And we help coach, guide, and mentor them for that. But this is going to be one where it takes a village, because the government's going to have to work with universities. You see what the Army has done with Carnegie Mellon, or the Air Force is doing with MIT. And it goes further than that, because to get AI into operations at scale, it is going to require innovation work to occur by the large contractors, whether they're the defense contractors or large contractors that, like Booz Allen, that are really adding a ton of value inside of the enterprise. So we're going to have the large contractors, the innovation community, higher ed, all working together to bring the promise of artificial intelligence to the federal marketplace with leverage and scale.
Yeah, I would just add on, agree with a lot of that. I don't think anyone can do this alone. The ecosystem, I think Stacey said, the ecosystems that allow integrations and our open architectures, those naturally accelerate solutions. I think we all know that. I am seeing a few interesting startups. They want to build like AI end-to-end solutions. I mean, have you ever seen an end-to-end solution work? No. It's like a recipe for hurt and disappointment. No, right? Open architecture solutions that allow your teams to use the tools and languages and frameworks that make sense and integrate into your tech stack and remain extensible into your future is paramount. I don't think a lot of people understand, if you're going to really use AI at scale, it's going to affect every layer of your tech stack, your infrastructure, your CPU, your GPU, your other chipsets. Is it in the cloud or on-prem or at the edge? Your deployment mechanisms, every bit of that is affected, and you have to have an ecosystem that allows lots of integrations for this to work at scale.
Yeah, and I would just add, just to dovetail on that point, the last point I'd make is, as a consumer of, the software and hardware that we do, having this layered approach and open standards approach is something incredibly important to us, because having monolithic technology stacks that don't move at different sort of paces and angle, timelines and cost structures just isn't going to work for us long term. We consume so much custom software that we need to be able to swap out or ride the technology curve on each of those different modules or layers of the stack, as opposed to just being captive to a single technology commoditization curve that may occur at a vendor's pace. And so that is so important to us. I can't overemphasize that aspect of sort of taking open standards and compartmentalizing and layered approach to building and consuming software.
Great, thanks. Well, as much as I'd love to continue the conversation, we're at time. So I have one last question that I'd like to wrap up with. We live in unprecedented times, and almost each one of us, everyone's being impacted by COVID. And what do you think the role of the government and corporations will be in the post-COVID recovery process? And how do you think it'll accelerate that? Just if you want to each take a minute quickly.
Well, listen, I'm hopeful. I'm going to be an optimist here. We've had galvanizing moments in the past, Industrial Revolution and World War II. I'm hoping that on the other side of this, we can have a galvanizing moment that builds a foundation, governance and interoperability that actually speeds up and accelerates the adoption of this responsibly, of this kind of technology across the enterprise, and that we find ways to help relieve some of the limited and constrained resources that we have, and that AI can actually contribute to a level of personalization of citizen services and funding, new job creation and whole new economies of the future. So that's my hope.
Thank you.
I mean, putting on my DoD hat, I'll just add that, as you know, I mean, obviously the military support to civilian authorities is a very, very key role that the DoD plays. Our job, as the JAIC, but also putting on my DoD hat, is to make sure that support, this military support to civilian authorities, such as NORTHCOM or the National Guard, that we arm them with the best technology and capabilities that we possibly can. When this this crisis hit, my predecessor, old boss, General Shanahan, we immediately sat down and talked about how we can bring very quickly AI-enabled capabilities to Northcom and to the National Guard for doing things like predictive analytics around supply chain data and things. Just you look at the lines of the food banks that the news was reporting. How can we actually directly apply capabilities to this? And we use this crisis as an opportunity to actually drive this change. And now Northcom and NGB are using Jake-developed software along with our commercial partners who built 45 different data sources and multiple models on top of it to do predictive analytics. This was a huge win for the DoD, for the Guard, and then as a way of delivering better services to our citizenry. So we feel very excited and proud to have contributed to that.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think
Stacey?
for big companies, I think it's time for the big tech companies. This crisis is accelerating the adoption of tech unlike anything I've ever seen before. And it's time for us tech companies to stand up and make sure that we provide the right technology, the right ecosystem with the right people without getting hung up on who's getting credit for what. And we just need to go and solve the problem. And then we can focus on sorting out credit at another day. But right now, I think we need to be responsible and deliver technology and deliver great solutions. I know Intel, we opened up our patent portfolio for anybody fighting the COVID crisis, and we intend to do more things like that to be a responsible citizen at this moment in particular.
Thank you. Anthony, any thoughts?
Yeah, global challenges like COVID-19 bring to the fore, I believe, some of the best of humanity. And I think you're seeing some of that across the federal government and cross-agency work. So the government, whether it's inside the Jake, as Nand talked about, or as across the federal government where they're trying to bring HPC assets and scientists and resources to go try to figure out what a vaccine might look like or how to address something like this, a global pandemic. We as a nation have solved some exceptionally challenging things in the past, and I have no doubt that COVID-19, when we look back at it, will be a defining moment where perhaps we saw expressed a greater sense of teamwork for global good. And I think we'll see that in this case.
Great. Thank you all. Thank you for sharing such valuable insights. Really appreciate your time. This brings us to the end, and thank you again for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.